And this is the meeting of the Healthcare Workforce Development Strategic Plan Advisory Group. So the advisory group is a body that functions to advise on and implement the Healthcare Workforce Development Strategic Plan. And I will facilitate the introductions just by going around my screen for folks. And I'll start with Abby, who is helping to organize these meetings and go from there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Rim, and I'm the acting executive director of the Vermont State Workforce Development Board. So I work in the governor's office and with the Department of Labor.
And for those of you that don't know, one of the recommendations in the Healthcare Workforce Development Strategic Plan was to formally join this advisory group with the Workforce Development Board. And that is very exciting and is also why Abby's working with us now. And we are now a formal subcommittee. Are we a subcommittee to the Workforce Board? Laura Pelosi is next on my screen.
Laura Pelosi here on behalf of the Vermont Healthcare Association, which is the trade group for the long-term care facilities, including nursing homes, residential care homes, and assisted living.
Hi, Laura. Thank you. Rebecca Capsalis is next.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Capsalis. I am the Network Director of Talent Acquisition for the UVM Health Network.
And Brian Kearns.
Hi, everyone. Brian Kearns, VP of HR for RRMC. Happy to be here. Thanks.
And Jessica Fredette. I'll go next to Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Palyuka. I'm the Senior Director of Workforce Development and Recruitment, and I'm with Bi-State Primary Care Association.
And Jessa
Barnard. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Medical Society. We are a membership association for physicians and PAs across the state.
Cheryl.
Hi, everyone. Cheryl Wilcox. I work for the Department of Mental Health, the Interagency Planning Director. I'm here because I co-chair a subgroup where our designated and specialized service agencies are focusing on their workforce. And so we have a strategic plan, and I want to make sure as things are discussed here that I bring it back to that group as we focus on that. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Cheryl. Devin.
Devin Green from the Vermont Association of Hospitals and Health Systems.
Lisa.
Hi, Lisa Fox, the Associate Dean of Nursing at Vermont Tech.
Jessica.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, Jessica Fredette. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer with the VNA and Hospice of the Southwest region. We cover Bennington and Rutland counties, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Jessica. And Wendy.
Hi, my name is Wendy Trafton. I'm the Deputy Director of Healthcare Reform. Nice to be here.
And Mary Kate.
Hi, Mary Kate Molman, Bi-State Primary Care Association, and supporting Stephanie as her backup.
And Johanna.
Ooh. Sorry about that. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Johanna Beliveau. I'm the CEO of Visiting Nurse and Hospice for Vermont and New Hampshire, and I'm going to be off camera while I eat my lunch, but I'm listening.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. Today, for our agenda, we wanted to spend some time to give an update about where we are relative to some of the various requirements of Act 183. And as we've been discussing iteratively. Act 183 does build on some of the recommendations in the Healthcare Workforce Development Strategic Plan. Act 183 also contemplates and provides for some activities that are beyond the strategic plan. We wanted to give an update today specific to the AHS requirements within Act 183 relative to some grant programs for providers, as well as some particular work group activities and programming. And again, thank you to this group for your contribution and for distribution of the questionnaire and survey that we worked with you on. I believe it was a month or so ago relative to apprenticeship programs and funding for those. And we are taking that feedback and working through that information to contribute there to that program design. We also, as you are aware, do have AHS was provided or asked to distribute nurse preceptor incentive grants, particularly for preceptors employed in critical access hospitals in Vermont. AHS was also asked to establish a preceptor working group. We'll give an update there. We were also asked to administer or required to administer a grant program for healthcare employer nursing pipeline and apprenticeship programming. And that again is where we provided or asked for your contribution to and your members' contribution to a survey to help us consider that programming in particular. And so, and prior to Act 183, as I think you're also familiar, the Agency of Human Services, consistent with the Healthcare Workforce Development Strategic Plan, in the Budget Adjustment Act, was appropriated funds for recruitment and retention activities, and we have been working in that arena as well to just create a program and distribute those funds, and we'll give you an update there too. As we've discussed previously with the group and in other settings, we are required to utilize the funds that were provided for by Act 183 in a way that is consistent and compliant with the federal requirements for these fund sources, which is the state fiscal recovery fund. So we are working within those guidelines specifically and have been spending quite a few months, as you know, ensuring that any program design and offerings that we provide for are consistent with those funding constraints. And the other piece that is dictated by that fund source is we have also 2 new positions that were provided for the Agency of Human Services. One is a workforce development coordinator position, the other a data center position. The data center position or data manager position is again consistent with one of the recommendations in our strategic plan to establish a workforce data hub for the state of Vermont. And then the coordinator position is one that I believe was envisioned certainly to help us to deliver on the strategic plan recommendations, but also the requirements of Act 183. And we are still going through the process of getting position numbers established for those so that we can get them into active recruitment. We're not quite there yet, but we've come a long way from the time when we were trying to make sure that we could hire or create those positions using these federal fund source for them. So that's an update there. Relative to the programming specifically, we also at the Agency of Human Services will require that we work with a contractor to help us provide for the nurse preceptor incentive grant program, as well as the healthcare employer nursing pipeline and apprenticeship program. These programs, because again, they are funded in part, these programs and grant opportunities, because they're linked with the federal funding source, have a lot of reporting requirements and other requirements for their administration. And that goes beyond the current capacity of the staff at AHS. So we are going to be issuing an RFP to work. I believe it's an RFP, and Wendy, shake your head if it's not an RFP, to work with a vendor to help us get these programs running. Do I have that right about the RFP specifically?
I'm pretty sure that's an accurate description.
Okay. I didn't know if I was missing there was a term that I was missing for that particular piece. So that's an update of where we are in terms of getting these programs going and funds starting to flow. So we have some time still to go in order to open these opportunities, but we are and have identified the next steps that we need to be taking in order to do so. Is there anything in that update, Wendy, that you think you'd like to add to, or that I've glossed over?
No, the only other thing I would add is the premium pay for workforce recruitment and retention program, as you know, has 2 rounds. The first round, we are just finished last week, our first financial reporting. So we're getting through that piece and really hope to be able to very quickly get out what round 2 parameters are. There's a few just sort of options we need to be considering due to various restrictions based on the statute and the SFR requirements. So we're just working through those, but I know I said this last time, we're hoping to get it out very quickly, but we are. So hopefully we'll be able to get news out to you soon.
We will be also convening the preceptor working group, and are working on agenda development and identifying members for participation in that working group. And we do expect to convene that hopefully within the, before the first half of November. We will begin convening that group, and we're working on a work plan for it now. Jessa.
Thanks. Sorry, I just had a question back on the second piece of the premium pay program. Wendy, can you remind me when that has to be spent by? So does that have to, will people have to apply and that have to go out the door before the end of the year, or can that extend beyond then?
Yes, so the time period's actually tied to with the SFR funding, the premium pay portion, when it's a premium pay program, needs to have the work performed during the public health emergency. So that is really our restriction. We can allow a longer time period for which to spend the funds, but those funds must be tied to individuals who worked during the public health emergency, which we know has an end date that is something we have to be seriously considering as we're rolling this out. It's the presidential proclamation, but we're still actively trying to make sure these dollars can be as meaningful as possible by making sure that it's still operating during that public health emergency. But you don't have to spend them during it. You just have to make sure the work was performed during that time period.
Okay, great. I'm just getting a little nervous about people having to pay attention and apply during the holidays. I feel like that's coming up surprisingly quickly. So want to make sure we have as much notice as possible to share that information with all of our networks.
That's a very good point, and we should be considering it and thinking about, if that is where it falls, making sure that our time period allows for those vacations people will be taking. So the last program wasn't a first come first serve, but we have to think about how long to leave that application process open.
Okay, thanks.
if there are folks that you'd like to nominate or for participation in the working group that we'll be establishing in the next several weeks, please do so. I think this is following up on, we raised that question as well in a previous meeting, but we would welcome your suggestions for any participants in the working group. That working group would be identifying ways to increase clinical placement opportunities, establishing sustainable funding models for compensating nurses as preceptors, or recommendations for what would be a sustainable way to hire additional nurses to alleviate pressure on preceptors, and looking at creating an action plan to accomplish those objectives. So we are looking to, again, launch that, and any recommendations for participants are welcome. So for the next item on our agenda, this is an idea that came forward from Betsy Hassan. And Betsy, I want to make sure did you introduce yourself? I realize I think you might have disappeared from my screen, and my apologies for that. As I was doing the roll call.
So hi everyone, I'm Betsy Hassan. I'm the Director of Nursing Education and Professional Development at the Medical Center.
And Betsy had shared some interesting idea and program with us not too long ago about licensure for nurse apprentices. And I asked if Betsy would be willing to bring that forward to this group for our consideration and to learn about that particular program.
Sure, I just have a few slides that I'll share. So can you all see those?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. I can't see you now. Okay, there we go. So this was a program actually that I was on a call with the Colorado Workforce Development group related to healthcare. And they said, have you heard about what they're doing in Alabama? And they shared that through a collaborative development of the Alabama Hospital Association, long-term care facilities, their Board of Nursing and educational programs, they developed a student nurse apprentice program that also had specific licensure. So basically what this is it's a competency-based model that is in alignment with the standard coursework of nursing school and accredited programs. But what it does is it allows the student, as they're working through that apprenticeship program, to then become fully licensed within the skills that they're competent in. So it really allows them to be contributing to the workforce a little bit sooner and a little bit more independently. There is a registered nurse that acts as a supervisor and as well as a mentor. So it's really one-to-one that a nurse is paired with this, in apprentice language, I think it's journeyman or, those sort of, guiding mentor. And this is in Alabama, they've done this for LPNs as well as registered nurses. And they've had it in place since March of 2022. So it's a relatively new program. But it works through a number of ways in which the Alabama Board of Nursing actually introduced legislation that allows for this new licensure type. The student applies as an apprentice and also applies to the Board of Nursing, as well as the program is registered and the employer is registered. So the ways that this type of program could really help to address Vermont's workforce barriers, again, it's a new mechanism for clinical placement and RN development. It's different than our traditional model. Lisa, it's a little bit almost like diploma nursing, a little bit in that sense, and that it's employer-based. It's a new pathway of becoming an RN. It's potentially a way to expand clinical placement into outpatient and primary care settings, because that apprentice time can also be captured if that's where the student apprentice works. It's possible that it could expand to other licensed healthcare careers, and it really aligns with the National Academy of Medicine's National Plan for Health Workforce Wellbeing, which was just issued this month as well. And they have specific actions and goals related to pathway development. So a model that already exists in Vermont is in with the Medical Practice Act is really thinking about medical students. So in the Vermont statutes, there is an exemption that allows medical students to engage in medical practice with the supervision of a licensed physician. They're in an accredited program and they're in an organized clinical training program. So this is sort of similar law that's already in place that we may be able to use as a framework. And then I did sort of share this with Lisa beforehand, and she brought up some just really great top of mind questions that would be specific to Vermont. So when we think about program accreditation, is this a new or a separate program? Can it be done through existing programs and just a different way to structure the clinical time? If there is payment to these apprentices, as which, you know, it's traditionally done, would accreditors approve this type of model, not module? And then if it is new or separate, what resources would be needed to get this off the ground and running? Because I think, you know, with everything else, we're taxed in this area as well. We need to understand the preparation of preceptors and mentors. You know, right now in terms of clinical faculty, there is BSN with MSN matriculation or MSN requirements. And then we would really need to understand program oversight and management. What's interesting about the Alabama Board of Nursing is that they actually serve as a nursing workforce center. So they have built all of this infrastructure. They centralize all the information. They have resources and processes all in place that are at the central hub of the Board of Nursing. And that is just something that we don't have in place right now. So this is just very high level information about the program. I can share the Alabama Board of Nursing website that has a lot more information, has a lot more detail, as well as that skills and competency checklist. So you could see the types of things that these students could be doing independently in practice once deemed competent.
Are there questions from the group? I have some questions, but I will hold them for the group to pose questions first. Stephanie.
Thank you. So I think that's really interesting about whether this could augment a current program or whether it needs to be a separate program, because I know just so little about accreditation for programs, and I don't know anything about the nursing accreditations, but I can only imagine with what I do know, if this could be an acceptable extension of something that's already done. And I think there's pros and cons probably to doing it either way, because are we thinking that this will allow offering these apprenticeships will get more people into nursing, and therefore we may, you know, need additional, are these additional people, or are they the sort of some of the same people, but giving them the right experience? I guess I don't know. Those are some thoughts or questions.
So the programs that are in Alabama are still accredited by the same accreditors that we use, CCNE. And so it's still an accredited nursing program. I just have questions out to them as to sort of the structure of it. Is a separate sort of track within their program? But it's all of the same didactic content. They're still getting all of those same nursing courses. Their clinical is just structured a little differently.
Thank you.
And why don't you go ahead, and you didn't have a chance to introduce yourself when we kicked off. So if you'd like to also introduce yourself, please.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was trying to get my, oh, hang on. Let me move my screen over to the other screen that I have. I'm actually looking at you guys. Hello, everybody. I'm Ann Bilodeau. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at HCRS. It's nice to see everybody again. My question, first of all, I think it's a really great opportunity to rethink how we get more candidates and how we offer more pathways into nursing here in the state of Vermont. So I really am very intrigued with the idea. My question, and I'm not sure whether this can be answered, is it possible to include mental health into this model as well? So I represent kind of the mental health side of things, and this would be tremendously helpful on the mental health side of things as well. So I didn't know if they had incorporated that into the Alabama program.
In the sense of like licensed social workers and that sort of thing?
No, nurses. We also have nurses.
Yeah,
Yes.
so these would be applicable to the same registered nurse program that, you know, to become a registered nurse, we have to take the same curriculum and those sorts of things. So it would be encompassing of that.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question that I think might be basic and obvious to everyone else here, but perhaps not to me, which is, it is the other benefit of a program with this design that the students can perform some tasks independently because they are licensed to do so, and therefore alleviate workforce pressures?
Yes, so it would be, so I almost think that there's an opportunity where, you know, if a nurse is in an apprenticeship program and they're working on a med-surg unit, by the time that they actually complete their degree requirements and graduate and obtain their true licensure, they wouldn't need an orientation because they've just spent, you know, however long, 2 years working at the bedside one-on-one with the nurse. They do need to, in addition to their work time, they do need to fulfill specialty requirements. So spending time on labor and delivery, psychiatry, those specialty areas, but the bulk of their time could be on their home hired unit.
So it speeds the path to being able to provide independent care, but it doesn't necessarily provide for a new component of the workforce in advance of that, meaning like doing only tasks that would be appropriate with that student licensure?
No, so it does. So
It does.
I'll share the skills, the competency list with you all, and it lines out all of the nursing tasks that they could perform independently once they are deemed competent. They have to be deemed competent by their coursework, as well as their supervisor and mentor. There are a few excluded items that Alabama noted. So the administration and discontinuation of blood or blood products, IV chemotherapy, taking verbal or phone orders, transporting a patient alone when an RN is required, providing independent double checks on high alert medications, witnessing consent, and anything that's not listed on this list that's not cleared by the employer or the academic program. So there is a lot that they could do, and in many ways be practicing independently.
Thank you. Devin.
I think Anne had her hand up first.
Oh, I'm sorry, Anne. I thought it was an old hand. Please go ahead.
I didn't mean for my hand to be raised. I'm so sorry. I should have taken it down.
Sorry. No, so I was just going to say, I think this is a really great idea just in terms of what we've seen as successful in Vermont is giving people the ability to work while learning. And CVMC does that really well in their formalized program, you know, paying people full time, even though they're doing part-time work and then learning the rest of the time. This is essentially doing that model as well. People are learning on the job, they're getting paid while they're learning, and then they're ready to hit the ground running as soon as they're done with it. So, and I also really like the idea of expanding into other areas like mental health, primary care, and other opportunities there too. I think it opens up a lot of doors. So thanks for presenting, Betsy.
Laura.
Yeah, so I love the idea, and I think it has a lot of great potential in long-term care facilities. And I also, you know, I think Jill Olson and I have, I think, repeatedly over the last few years, and other reps from sort of the long-term care settings have, you know, kind of indicated a need for our RN programs in general to have a greater emphasis on long-term care settings. There's the primary emphasis is on the hospital setting, but we really need to be preparing nurses to be able to be prepared coming in to these settings. It is a different type of care and different expectations. So it'd be really nice as part of this to kind of do this in a way where we could really start to create pathways for nurses in long-term care.
I almost feel like that is the ideal place to pilot this. So that, I mean, that would be my recommendation.
I like it.
Johanna and then Lisa.
Yeah, hi. Continuing on this theme of alternative settings for nurses in terms of their development as students and then as they enter the profession, I am curious, Betsy, if you know anything more about how the program in Alabama has worked in that regard, understanding that RN students are required, as you already articulated, to have rotations on various specialty areas like maternity. And, so I'm trying to imagine how that nurse student from a long-term care setting or a home health setting, in my case, then gets matched and paired to do these other specialty practices outside of their sort of home clinical area. So if Alabama has an example for that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I will definitely pose that question to them. Again, that's going to take collaboration of all of those clinical environments to make sure that that's done.
Right.
And Lisa?
Hi. Yeah, I mean, Betsy sent me this information just to kind of, so that I could look at it and maybe come up with some thoughts on the academic side. For things. And I think it's a great thing to look at. I just, we do need to be cognizant of the fact that regardless of the program, whether it's a PN program or an RN program, and regardless of the accreditor that the program has, there's a certain number of hours that have to be in med surg, that have to be in maternity, that have to be in pediatrics, that have to be in these different areas. That makes it, difficult to solely have a person in one environment because the students still have to meet all of the objectives of the academic program. But fortunately in Vermont, we have some wiggle room as to those hours, which is good. So, there is a wide variety of med surg hours that are listed as adult care hours, which could technically be utilized in multiple different environments, which, Laura, that goes to the long-term care. Doesn't necessarily have to be in an acute care setting, but it has to be care of the adult. So, those creatively, we could come up with ways to still meet the objectives and have students in other areas doing those hours. But, we just would have to make sure that the academic programs that it's set out really clear for the accreditors. The other thing that we have at Vermont Tech that we do a little bit of this in the fact that our LPN program, the first year, all of the students have to get their LPN license before they come into our second year as ADNs. And we actually utilize part of that licensure in their ADN program where they can do a lot of things independently because they already are licensed individuals. So, when we're doing clinical with those folks, there's a lot of things that they're doing that we're not necessarily standing there watching them do because they're already licensed to do a lot of these things. And so that's one of the things with our accelerated program that we're able to do some of that because of that licensure. So having some kind of preceptor or apprenticeship licensure for the students, even the first year, might be beneficial to be able to let them do more things without as many instructors having to watch them every minute. So yeah, I think that this is definitely something that is worth, looking into and pursuing. I think it offers a lot more opportunities for students. And I get students all the time that are like, I am not interested in acute care. I I want to go work with geriatrics. I want to work in outpatient. I want to work in all these other mental health and all these other places. And so, we do force them to do a lot of med surge in the hospital, and it's just not where their interest lies. So, if there's a way to take those students and put them where they're interested and want to work, I think that's a great idea.
Lisa, are those clinical hours, are they guided by a Vermont Board of Nursing?
So they are, yeah, so they're both the Vermont Board of Nursing and by our accreditors. So to be accredited as a program, you have to have so many hours of particular topics. Based on the standards of the accreditation, which they're pretty similar across the accreditors, whether it's ASIN or CCNE or CNEA, whichever one they happen to be. They're very close, because if you look at every nursing program across the country, they're set up very similar, and the objectives are very similar. The hours of each program are very similar. So, it's definitely something that has to be approved by the accreditation folks. But I don't know if this would be, something like this wouldn't necessarily be like you have to do an entire accreditation program. I don't think, if you're keeping the academics the same and you're just changing the clinical structure, as long as they're still meeting the objectives, it would be more of an update or an additional clinical structure that you would have to get approved. But that's a much easier process than developing an entire new program and getting that accredited.
Okay.
Laura and then Devin. I think that was the right order.
Yeah, so I think you just basically answered this, but one of the things that I've often thought about is, can't we have a separate track for a nurse who wants to be a licensed long-term care nurse? I know, we know a lot of folks in our space who just, they don't want to go get the RN because they don't want to do the acute care stuff. They don't want to have to go through all of the med surge, all of the maternity, they want to do geriatrics. And so it seems like maybe the accreditors don't allow for sort of a separate licensing track where you'd be licensed just to do long-term care. It seems like we need some flexibility maybe to do some of those things.
The thing that it comes down to is the NCLEX. Because the NCLEX is not just geriatric care information. And so in order for students to be successful at the NCLEX, they need to have the exposure to these other clinical areas and to the other information. Because we don't make the NCLEX. And the thing is most of the NCLEX is acute care based. I mean,
right.
they're changing it up for next
year. We like to teach to standardized tests. Like, I get that. I just think the model, they really need to look at that model. I mean, I get it. We do the same thing in every other educational setting, but food for
well,
thought.
if we can't, yeah. I mean, the thing is, if the students can't pass the NCLEX, then they're not going to be able to practice as nurses. I mean, this would be a broader topic to come up with, to speak to about NCLEX, delivery and formation.
Devin, I think you're on mute.
I am. I would be interested. It feels like the accreditors are the separate entity unto themselves. Like, I don't know how to lobby them. I know how to lobby a lot of people, and I don't know how to get to them. I don't know if this is something we bring to our congressional delegation, but it's clear to me that it may be helpful to take another look at some of the standards that they have. And I guess one thing, I think you answered this, Lisa, but just to confirm, so like when we ran into the issue about taking away the master's requirement for faculty, what we ran into was a problem with the accreditation, but that would not be a problem here because the apprenticeship would be more in the clinical space, and so those requirements wouldn't apply, right?
I'm unsure of that. And that's something that Betsy and I had kind of emailed back and forth about. That's something that I would have to find out about, because it's a fine line. Because we do just have clinical, we just have clinical people who teach for us that aren't our employees. at the college, and they still have to have a master's. So anyone that is supervising, evaluating, doing grades or any of that stuff for our students have to adhere to the accreditation standards.
Okay.
Johanna.
Thank you. Yeah, just building off of Devin's comments around advocacy and the work that Lisa's already described. I mean, we would really have to be advocating at the national level. Of course, I think we all understand that, but this is a question for the ANA and the American, Association of Colleges of Nursing. And so it's worth considering, but it is fundamentally talking about changing everything about the way registered nurses are educated and deemed competent for the full scope of practice. So that's no small feat.
I think, yeah, one of the, questions that I think is really pertinent for Alabama is, what is the structure of how you're doing this in these specialty settings or these sort of non-acute care settings? Because, and I imagine that this took a great deal of planning and coordination and collaboration between all those entities to get there with the current accreditors. So, I'm hopeful that we'll have more information.
Yeah, and I don't think it's impossible. I just think, like Betsy said, it takes a lot of planning. And I do think that, there's still objectives that students will have to meet. So I don't feel that they can go to one environment and do all of their clinical in that one environment, but they could do the majority of it in that one environment, which, which is incredibly helpful. For example, we had a partnership with Birchwood Terrace in Burlington, and we had a separate cohort that we developed just kind of for their employees, where the entire first semester of the LPN program they did at Birchwood. The second semester they did in the hospital to get all of that hospital stuff and those objectives out of the way. And then for their third semester, they went back to Birchwood and did all of their time at Birchwood. And then they went and worked there. And that seemed to work really well. We just haven't had, any of their students recently. So we're doing more in acute care because that's what the group is doing now. But, if we had more of those students, we can do something like that. That's not something we're already accredited for that. We could do that pretty easily. But, we would just have to work closely with, any sort of employer that was interested in doing that. We're more than happy to talk to them about that. But that, that gives 2/3 of the learning in that environment, which, was pretty good. And they ended the semester in that environment. So they were basically doing orientation that last semester. And then, were able to work. So there are ways that we could make it work almost with the current structure that we have. But I mean, that's also Vermont Tech. I don't know how it would work with other nursing schools. That's something that, would have to kind of get involved with them and see how that would work as well.
I think too, just one key piece that I see with at least Alabama and a number of other states is really that sort of centralization of resource and sort of program structure and oversight that we just don't have in place right now that I think is really needed to support a program like this, especially if you're going to have multiple employers at different settings engaging in it and that connection to the Board of Nursing. So I think that's a key piece too.
So Betsy, that's a key linkage to the work that was required for the working group in terms of clinical placement a statewide clinical placement recommendation. Am I hearing, I think I'm hearing that there's strong interest in continuing to look at whether this could be an option that could be employed in Vermont. And it sounds like some potential next steps there in particular are continuing to gather information from Alabama. Also looking at once that information is included, I think it or gathered, it sounds to me like there would be continued discussion around the program or pilot design, and then thinking about that relative to the clinical structure and how the clinical structure would be updated to accommodate that. I have a question about connecting with the Office of Professional Regulation and whether that, when that makes sense in the next steps, because I assume that it's a necessary next step as well. And Lisa and Devin have their hands up. I think Lisa's hand went up first.
This is just a quick question for Betsy, actually. You know, if you're following up with Alabama, it would be really helpful to know, did you say they are CCNE accredited, which
I think the list of
which is surprising to me, but and then, you know, it'd be interesting if they would be willing to share kind of the outline of how they wrote up their program for the accreditation.
Okay.
Just, you know, because that would certainly help us, any of the nursing schools, you know, for us kind of going to our accreditors and saying, this is how it would work.
Yeah.
And this is how it fulfills the standards that they require.
Okay.
I also think it's worth looking into whether, I mean, what you were talking about, Lisa, was an intriguing program. So can we sort of do this now? Is there a way to standardize that program and roll it out to employers who might want to take advantage of it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we could call it an apprentice. Well, technically, I guess we do sort of have an apprenticeship type program, but it's Vermont Tech Nursing, but we can work with employers to do a partnership and try and develop in a way that is more beneficial to them. For example, we do that with CVMC. We're doing one with UVMMC. You know, I know SVMC has one with Castleton. You know, there's a few around the state that we certainly can do. And with our long-term care cohort as well, we're trying to develop with the long-term care agencies so that we can have people working there with them. So, you know, if there's any employers or facilities, you know, that are interested in this, we're more than happy to talk to them about how we could make this happen. You know, our kind of limitations are in clinical, having folks to help with clinical, but if the agencies are willing to help us cover that clinical component of the, you know, supervising and that sort of thing, we can work with that. And then, you know, we do need people to actually teach the lectures. You know, we can only have so many students in a class. So that's the other limitation. And, you know, again, reaching out to employers to help us perhaps find people that are interested in teaching, even if they're coming on as an adjunct to teach those classes, but they still work full time for the hospital. You know, we could work things out. We could work some things out to make these happen. It's, you know, on our side, it's our employees we're short on employees just like everyone else, but you know, we're very creative, and just like, you know, all of you as well, we're used to thinking outside the box and coming up with some ideas to make things work. And so with our current curriculum, there are ways we can be creative and make some things work right now. It wouldn't be perfect, and I think that this proposal would be really interesting to look towards, and I think it would be extremely helpful to have some kind of centralized program that is easy for employers to access and easy for schools of nursing to access, and have that everything like written out on how that would work. And then it would be a very smooth transition. But in the meantime,
100% agree.
Yeah. In the meantime, if there's some things that we can do to help until this gets developed, you know, I'm more than willing to speak with folks about it.
Lisa, when you did the Birchwood cohort, was that a one-to-one model in terms of clinical time? Like, was it structured like a dedicated education unit, or did they have clinical faculty supervision?
We actually had a clinical faculty that worked there. And so they already worked for us, but they worked for them too. So they just took over the clinical there. And so it was just that one person with 9 students, and they did everything there the first semester, and then she went with them to the hospital and did the things there, and then she went back to Birchwood with them for the 3rd semester and worked with them there. So they had one person, but she was able to go back and forth. But it doesn't mean that they have to be able to go back and forth. We can obviously supplement.
Mary Kate?
I wanted to add to the just list of questions that I'm curious about for the Alabama program is, have they, with the apprenticeship, looking at the mentor side, how they handled or addressed the issue of reduced clinical capacity for that mentor? Because that's also an issue that I've heard raised around like preceptorships, et cetera. Like, so that's just another question to add.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I just want to again emphasize, I think the need to have a centralized structure and programming that employers can access. I think, the Birchwood example is one of the best examples that we have, but not everybody is set up to be able to do that. So I think that's a real challenge, and in what we've seen in kind of working in the long-term care cohort, the nurse programs are up against this accrediting issue of still wanting master's level nurses to do the clinical portions. And so, we'd identified an administrator with a PhD, in nursing, as well as a number of master's level nurses that were interested, but it's really hard to take on that commitment. So, I think the capacity issue is still very significant, and we've got to, I think, still figure out how we're going to solve that capacity issue, especially if we're still looking at needing master's levels nurses. I mean, I think in Vermont, 5 to 6% of nurses have a master's degree. I mean, it's just not, it's not workable. And, I think obviously we all sort of question the necessity of that when it comes to the clinical portion, but in any event, so I think the Birchwood model is a shining example, but I think it's pretty unique considering the resource that they had in-house at that facility.
I sometimes think of this as sort of like an extension of our structure of a senior practicum student. So, they're paired with a BSN prepared nurse, which is predominantly what's at the bedside. And they still have, some clinical faculty oversight, but it's much broader. It's just really checking in with the preceptor and the nurse. But they're really gaining that practice experience from the BSN person at the bedside that they're working one-to-one with. So that's sort of how I would think that they've structured it. Because like you said, I don't think there's many master's prepared nurses that are working directly at the bedside right now.
With the next steps that we've laid out, Betsy is taking the lead on going back to Alabama to ask these additional questions. And then from there, again, I'm happy to connect and bring the OPR folks to a discussion with this group if that makes sense, but would take that under the advisement of the group about when we'd be ready for that step. And then it sounds to me like there certainly, once the information is gathered from Alabama, might need to be some follow-up and more focused conversations about the program design, to keep proceeding in this direction. And I do recognize that we're nearly out of time, and I appreciate that Liz Cody put a comment in the chat regarding AHEX. AHEX kind of, I would say, services. I don't know if the services is the right terminology to use, but AHEX offerings for students exploring health careers. What I think I wanted to get feedback from this group on, and that we can pursue, like with we can write the question more clearly for the group, and we can gather feedback over time and certainly have additional discussion about it, is specifically with Act 183, there are a number of new financial resources for persons who might be pursuing a nursing career already in the state of Vermont, might choose to pursue nursing or other healthcare professional career, mental health and substance use disorder treatment professionals careers in Vermont. We have more financial resources available today than we have in the past. There are also financial resources potentially available through federal or other non-state program loan forgiveness, etc. And one of the recommendations in the strategic plan is to identify a single place where that information can live, so that people can go to one place to understand what their options are for support, financial support specifically. So that was the discussion that we wanted to begin to gather feedback from the group about what that most appropriate and most accessible single place could be, or what it would look like. And again, we can follow up with that question in writing, but really being able to compile all of those resources in one place so that they can be found and utilized, and of course, be more clear as an option for individuals. If there are any thoughts in the final 2 minutes about that you feel like you just want to get out here now, please feel free. But understanding that this might be a topic for more discussion, and it may also be helpful for us to bring back some potential options for where these resources could live. Because even within the Agency of Human Services, these resources are now sitting with the Department of Mental Health, with the Department of Health. So we have them even dispersed in an agency, so it's not necessarily clear where someone would go looking for that information.
Yeah, Ina, this is Lisa. I think that is incredibly important. I will say I onboard hundreds of students every year, and none of them know where to find any. They don't know about any of this stuff. They don't know where to find anything. And sometimes if a student obviously we can't meet one-on-one with every single student all the time, but we try to send out as many resources as we can, but not all of them follow up on them, or it's just too difficult to find every area where they are. And I get students all the time that are struggling, and they just don't know where to find this stuff. And they may have not dropped out of school, or they may have come to school because they could have gotten something paid for, but they didn't understand that they had these resources. So yeah, I mean, this is a huge thing for nursing schools, and for at least for nursing students. And I know our paramedicine and radiography and respiratory therapy, all of those other students as well. It's really tough to find that information.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think we heard that feedback previously when we were putting together the plan, but it's only become more, I think, significant, particularly because we have at this juncture even more possible options for people to receive assistance. So now it's really apparent and critical that we gather those in one place so they can be found.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's if there could be just a web page created that was Vermont Health Careers or something. I mean, I know they have the vthealthcareers.org, but I don't know, something where they could just have everything on that one page, even if it's linked to other areas, but at least it's all listed there of, this is this benefit, here is where you find it. Here's this benefit, this is where you find it. And I do know that some of the students have a very difficult time understanding the descriptions of the benefits. So it's not always written out clearly. A lot of it is, listed in, this statute or this or that, and they don't understand what that actually means for them. Something very clear cut with, these are the people eligible. If you're a nursing student, these are the things you're eligible for. If you're going into mental health, these are the things you're eligible for. If you're, looking to go into community health, these are the things, whatever it happens to be, but make it a little clear as to, I'm this kind of student. These are the things that are applicable to me.
Thanks. It sounds a little bit to me like what I know that is available now for electric vehicle credits. Like there are some single places where you can go to figure out how you're going to layer your credits and what you're eligible for. And it seems like something along those lines is what we need to be targeting. But it does sound, and we are over time, so I don't want to take more of your time, but it does sound to me like there's not an existing place that folks are necessarily going to, so that if we did develop this place, we could newly establish it. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. And Betsy, thank you for sharing your findings as well and presenting to the group. That was a really great discussion. And
thanks.
Abby, thank you for supporting us as usual. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Laura, thanks for bringing your dog.
Thanks. This is Billy.
Billy.
So cute.
Bye-bye.
Bye.